If you're on piano YouTube, you've probably seen these videos teaching you 4 chords, usually C, G, A minor, and F, and promising that you can play hundreds or thousands of songs with those 4 chords. This idea has been around for a while. Axis of Awesome had this viral video several years ago where they played 50 songs in 6 minutes, all using the same chord progression. But if you take C, G, A minor, and F, and you go to play along with those original recordings, you quickly run into a problem, because those songs do not use those 4 chords. Even if we just look at the first 5 songs from that Axis of Awesome medley, Don't Stop Believin' uses E, B, C sharp minor, and A. You're Beautiful uses E flat, B flat, C minor, and A flat. Where Is the Love? F, C, D minor, and B flat. Forever Young actually does use C, G, A minor, and F. And I'm Yours uses B, F sharp, G sharp minor, and E. These songs do not use the same chords. They use the same chord functions. And in this video, I want to teach you what is a chord function, how can you identify chord functions in any song, and then how can you practice so that thinking of chords in this way becomes second nature and you can harness the power of this very useful concept. You need to know that most music is in a key. That means that out of all 12 pitches, we're mostly just using 7. And C major is a really easy example because it just uses all the white keys. But this same sequence of whole steps and half steps can be started on any note, and you'll end up with another set of 7 notes that might be the basis for an entire piece of music. It's good to think of these scales or keys more as a palette of available notes, because in any key, not only can you build melodies off of that set of notes, you can build chords off of that set of notes. If we start on the first note of the scale, and then skip over every other note in the scale, we get our 1 chord. This is the chord built on the first note of the scale. And we can build chords off every other note of the scale. Here's the 4 chord, 5 chord, 6, and 7. When we number chords this way, based on where they belong in the key of the song, that's a chord function. Some of these chord functions are more popular than others. And this brings us to the 4 chord functions used in these classic 4-chord videos. The 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, and 6, which is a minor chord. These 4 chords are much more popular than most other chords. In fact, not only are lots of songs built on just these 4 chords, but even in songs that use more advanced harmony or use the other chords that belong in the key, these 4 chords tend to make up the majority of chord functions in those songs. I'd say like 80% of the chords used in popular music are these 4 chord functions, even when there are other chord functions that do show up in the song. So on the one hand, these 4 chord videos can feel a little gimmicky and maybe feel frustrating for beginners when you go to play with the original recordings and it's not C, G, A minor, and F. But this idea of chord functions is probably the most useful music theory concept that you can use as a songwriter, producer, or anyone interested in playing popular music. It's one of these things where the more that you work with it over time, its benefits sort of reveal themselves to you. It's really good for your ear. It's good for your understanding of how the chords are working in a song. And it makes it much easier for you to learn new songs as you begin to recognize these same chord functions coming up over and over again. So let's talk about how you could come across a new song and identify the chord functions in the song. I would say this is an intermediate skill, because if you know your major scales, this is pretty easy. If you don't know all of your major scales, this is basically going to be impossible. I have a PDF resource that you can grab for free that shows the shapes of all 12 major scales, and I also have some other videos that you can check out on the topic of major scales if you're still at that point of needing to learn your major scales. But let's say you do know your major scales, you're looking at a new unfamiliar chord progression, and you're trying to determine what key the song is in. Well, typically you only need a couple chords, and that key will reveal itself to you. For example, let's say we're looking at E major, B major, C sharp minor, and A major. We actually have all the information we need to know what key the song is in. If we take the sort of conglomerate of all the notes that we used in those chords that I just played, there is only one major scale that uses this set of notes, and it is E major. So if you can play through a chord progression and kind of keep track of all of the notes that you're using, you should be able to figure out the key of the song through process of elimination. Now, over time, there's also an ear training element to this where you'll learn to recognize the sound of one. It's the most resolved chord and the most resolved note. It sounds like the end of the piece. Once you know the key of the song, finding the chord functions is pretty trivial. If we know that the song is in the key of E major, then all we have to do to find the chord function of B major is count up from the bottom of the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. B major is our 5 chord. Now, if you're new to this process, this might seem kind of tedious, and it is when you start doing it. So even if you're sold on the importance of identifying chord functions and thinking in terms of numbers, you're probably eager for a way to practice this so that it doesn't require so much conscious thought. And yes, it's possible to practice this concept to the point where you barely have to think about identifying chord functions. The single best thing you can do to practice this is to take a chord progression and practice playing it in all 12 keys. But that's a little bit of an advanced place to start. So the first place I would recommend is just playing lots of songs in their original keys. As we saw in the chord progressions from those first 5 songs of the Axis of Awesome video, you're going to make your way through pretty much every major and minor chord, even if you just play a few songs in their original keys. So that's a great place to start because it means that you will at least be familiar with every type of major and minor chord on your instrument. The next step I would suggest is to transpose simple melodies. This means you'll take a simple melody and play that in all 12 keys. And you could start with something really simple, like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a great one. I often recommend practicing counterclockwise around the circle of fifths when you're practicing something in all 12 keys. So you could go from C to F, and so on. And this is an easier place to start than transposing chord progressions because you're just having to think about one note at a time, but you're still turning notes into numbers. The only way to practically play any melody in all 12 keys without a ton of trial and error is to start thinking of the melody notes as numbers. 1, 1, 5, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1. And this is where I see my students make a lot of progress with this numbers concept. If we spend a few weeks where each week they're taking some very, very simple melody and playing it in all 12 keys, they tend to see a huge jump in their ability to think in numbers. And this is good for ear training. It's good for theory knowledge. It's just my favorite thing to recommend that people do on the piano. So once that starts getting a little more comfortable, you're ready to try transposing chord progressions. And this classic chord progression used in the Axis of Awesome video is a great one to start with. You can go 1, 5, 6, 4. Put that in all 12 keys. Look for good voice leading with inversions in your right hand. And you will have gone farther than the vast majority of adult piano students in becoming comfortable with chord functions at the piano. Now, if I've done a good job explaining myself, you may already understand this idea intellectually, and you've just watched a short YouTube video. But like most things in music, the concepts are easy. Fluency takes time. And I'm actually currently planning an entire group coaching curriculum around this concept, transposing simple melodies and chord progressions, because I feel so strongly that it is the single most useful thing you can do to gain comfort at the piano keyboard as a songwriter or producer. So if you're curious about that, go to pianofluency.com. And if you're watching this in the future, I may have already launched that curriculum. Thanks for watching, and I hope I've added something useful to the world of 4 chords piano videos on YouTube. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency.